Hello, lords and ladies. Today we're going to look at medieval trade in towns and how cities and towns are going to grow during the High Middle Ages. Today's objectives, what we're going to talk about, is that we want to be able to discuss why cities like Venice became trading centers in the Middle Ages. We're going to want to be able to identify and discuss the purpose of the Hanseatic League. And we're going to want to analyze and explain the factors that contribute to the growth of towns and cities during the Middle Ages. So these are the objectives. This is what you need to be able to do by the time we're done with this. If you've heard of Venice before, you probably know it's a pretty unique city in the world. I've had students in the past who have been there. I'm jealous. But it is supposedly one of the most beautiful cities there is, but it is, again, unique, and we'll talk about why today. The Hanseatic League is something kids always forget, so please make sure that as you're doing that you understand and put it into the mental file. And we're going to look at why towns and cities are going to grow up throughout these Middle Ages. So these are the things, again, that you're going to need to be able to discuss today. So if you need time, pause it, because we're going to move on in a moment. Okay, the first thing that we're going to look at is the impact of the Crusades and how that actually made a change in Europe, and the fact that trade is going to increase. So the bulk of the reason for that results from what we've talked about already, that the Crusades increased European interest in the Middle East, not just Arabia and things like that, but also Asia, like China, Japan, Korea, Singapore, India, those areas. Trade starts to grow throughout this time because of the Crusades. Okay, and this trade is going to be mostly controlled by Italy because it is centrally located on the Mediterranean Sea, and geography plays a huge role here because it's the crossroads. That sea is the crossroads for pretty much the known world at that point. And so if Italy controls it, Italy will reap all of the benefits from it. So think about for a second how the other countries are going to feel about the fact that Italy is the one controlling all of this trade. Okay, so think about that as we're going. We want to take a look at the map that's going to come up. That talks to you and shows you a little bit about what Italy looked like in 1000. Keep in mind, it's not called Italy at this point. The people consider themselves Italians, but it's not a unified country. You can see that some of the southern tips of it are controlled by, in fact, the Byzantine Empire. Sicily is a separate city-state, right? Venice up there in the north. How is that location going to help it control trade? Now, we're going to kind of lay out those factors, how Italy gets all these trade cities. They are very skilled sailors, which served them well for most of their history. One of the most important trade cities is going to be Venice. And Venice is a well-protected city. It's in northern Italy, as you saw on that map, so that it's inlet on the bay, and you have to come close to, very close in there to attack it. It is a unique city. It's actually sinking today, and it's a serious problem there. But the Venetians are going to trade with the Byzantine Empire, the Muslims. Other important trade cities that we'll see, are going to be Genoa, where Christopher Columbus is from, Florence, Pisa, Milan. These cities are also going to become important trading cities. So these cities give the Italians control of just about all of the trade throughout southern Europe and allow it to become exceptionally wealthy at this time, which is going to play into the next era of history that we talk about as well, the Renaissance. So keep that in the back of your mind as we're talking about all of this, but Italy is getting wealthier and wealthier. Okay? And Venice is one of the most important cities for that trade and promoting that trade. Now think about, though, how the other countries are going to feel about Italy controlling all of this trade throughout the region. You're not going to see them happy about it. They're going to be frustrated, and they're going to want to see what they can do to get a piece of the pie, so to speak. So, again, Venice trading with the Byzantine, the Muslims, all throughout the region, while other northern states in Europe are going to be frustrated with what they see Italy doing, and they're going to try to change. So let's take a look. I want to show you some pictures of Venice today as it is now. So you'll get that first. It's a very pretty shot of one of the canals. As you know, or hopefully know, Venice is largely on canals. And so you have to get around by that little boat there called a gondola in order to go from place to place, not all throughout Venice, but through much of Venice. And the next picture that you'll see is going to be a painting of a medieval Venice, so what it looked like, or an approximation of what it looked like during the time period that we're talking about, so that you see, it hasn't changed too much. You still have the element of people having to get around by the gondolas and along the canal system in Venice. Okay, so Venice, again, you saw in the painting as before. Now, we talked about how the other countries are not terribly thrilled with Venice and Italy controlling everything, so we're going to see their reaction, and it is in fact to form a different competitive trade organization called the Hanseatic League. The Hanseatic League is formed by the North German cities who want to promote and protect their trade. They are going to control, the Hanseatic League that is going to control trade between Europe, Russia, and the Baltic region, so northern trade routes. And what you're going to see is that these northern German cities forming the Hanseatic League helps them to solidify their trade relationships with their region, so that Italy can't really compete in that area. Not that they're trying to anyway, but just another way for the Hanseatic League and the northern German cities to be able to protect their own trade, which is something that is very important for them if they're going to survive and compete with what we see happening in Italy. So the Hanseatic League, again, is a trade organization. They would do things like set up free trade between the German cities so that they're not competing with one another, they're just competing against Italy. So that's what you would see. So again, what you see with the Hanseatic League is that the northern German cities are going to try to protect their trade by setting prices, setting taxes, and promoting free trade between themselves, and possibly taxing Italian goods, things that would compete with them. That's the goal of a trade organization like the Hanseatic League. And again, that's set up in Northern Europe, going between Northern Europe, Russia, and the Baltics. The Baltic republics today are Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. So it's talking at this point about the land that's surrounding the Baltic Sea, which is in Northern Europe. We'll take a look in a second at a map that shows you guys the trade routes that go throughout medieval Europe. They're going to be color-coded, so you're going to see the green are the Hanseatic trade routes, the red are Venetian trade routes, which I'm sure you can see are pretty extensive. Genoese trade routes are the yellow, okay, so Genoa. And the blue are all of the overland connections that are made. And you can see that they go into northern Africa, Spain, right, obviously. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to look at is the trade fair. Trade fairs and trade markets are going to be set up. So all these goods that are coming in, as you saw on the map, you see all these different trade routes. All these goods that are coming in are going to be sold in fairs. So what you'll see is the merchants are going to move around. They're going to go from one place to the next, setting up a trade fair or a trade market, and they'll try to sell their goods there. What happens is the trade fairs start to kind of settle into an area. So rather than traveling around all of the time, the merchants start to say, you know what, I'm going to stay here and this will be my base of operations. And so those trade fairs kind of establish some of those first towns that we're going to see in the medieval period. Because, again, the merchants don't want to set up and keep moving around. They want to have some kind of stability. So what you're going to see is that these trade fairs, towns will set up there, and then where they're really plentiful, you'll see that the cities start as well. Trade is also going to make people go back to money. And with the simulation that we did in class with the trade, you should see that it's pretty hard to trade cows and pigs and things like that for jewelry and all of these things. So to have a sense of money and start using a uniform system again, like money, is something that is going to benefit Europe tremendously throughout these trade fairs and these trade markets. So again, trade and the resurgence of trade is going to make a tremendous impact on the Middle Ages. This is a picture of a medieval trade fair, what it, a painting again of what it is perceived to look like. And you can see that that's done in color. This is a medieval rendering of a trade fair, where you see it's setting up in the center of town. Okay, and then the town is built up around it. Now, what we're going to see with these trade fairs and the growth of towns and cities is that towns and cities also grow up. Remember, the Crusades, the men left. They were not going to stay as serfs to a lord that was no longer even there. So what you're going to see is the new technologies that were introduced for farming contribute to that idea as well, as the men not staying there. And you see them going into the cities to look for jobs and into the towns. So farming technology improves. The iron plow in particular is a weapon or a tool that makes things very, very easy compared to how they were done in the past. So you don't need as many farm workers, and now these guys have to go into towns and cities and find new jobs, mostly in retail and selling things. Merchants moves there to sell to these newfound farmers and workers, and so these towns get larger and larger, and they start to grow into cities. If you think about that term cities and the growth of cities, that's called urbanization. So you're starting to see the beginnings of some urban lifestyles in the Middle Ages, where people are now moving away from the farms. They're not tied to the land anymore. The merchants target them as a group to sell to, and they settle down in these towns, and then these towns start to grow into larger cities. So that happens in large part because of the Middle Ages, the trade that's inspired by the Crusades, that's going to help towns and cities grow up all throughout medieval Europe. Okay, so the next picture that you're going to see is of a medieval town and what that would look like. Next couple of pictures that you'll see, medieval towns and what they look like. Now you'd be looking at the next association that we're going to look at, which is called a guild. So all of this movement into the towns and the cities leads to many people who are working at the same exact craft or the same exact trade, barrel makers or blacksmiths. They're all working at the same craft, so competition is very fierce. So what you see happen is they set up what are called guilds. A guild is an association of people who are working at the same craft or the same trade. The idea is to limit competition, so they set standards for how every good should be made, what it should look like, and also how much it should cost, and that helps them limit the competition. Kids are not going to school yet for the most part, especially if their parents are not well off, if they don't have money. So what you're going to see is that the guilds also help to train children. They take them in as apprentices. At first, that's the lowest level where you're learning, and then you rise up to become a journeyman. And that means that you are more skilled at the craft, probably in your teenage years. And by the time you're done being trained, you are a master of the craft, and then you would join the guild and have your own business. So the guilds were important for training as well and helped kids who might not otherwise get educated become skilled at a particular craft. You're going to see two pictures of guilds in the Middle Ages and what they would look like, type of work that they would do, and they're like the early version of what we today call unions, where you set prices and things like that. And in terms of the unions today, they set their